Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to another lesson. So the basis for tayammum is the ayah in the Quran, the same ayah in Surah Ma'idah, verse number 6. If you are ill or on a journey, or one of you comes from the place of relieving himself, or you have contacted woman and do not find water, then seek clean earth and wipe over your faces and hands with it. So tayammum, known as dry ablution, tayammum is permissible when there is a valid excuse such as the following. First of all, what is tayammum? Tayammum is basically using earth, soil, dust from the earth to purify yourself when you don't have wudu, when you cannot make wudu. Now, right at the end of this lecture, we'll discuss how to make tayammum. But at the moment, we're going to look at the conditions that permit tayammum to be made. So, for example, tayammum, our author says, is permissible when there is a valid excuse, such as the following: being roughly 1 Hashmat mile. That's approximately 1 mile as we know it. So 1.16, about a mile away from water. Extreme cold, sickness, wounds on most of the body, fear of thirst, either for yourself, for your companion, or your riding animal, present or future. Fear of an enemy around the water. Fear of missing the funeral prayer or the Eid prayer, even if one's wudu breaks during the prayer as opposed to the Friday prayer or normal prayer. So these are the categories. We're going to have a look at them one by one now. We'll start off with the fear of missing the funeral prayer. Now, why did he mention the funeral prayer and the Eid prayer, but he didn't say that you could fear of missing the normal prayers? That's because normal prayers have a makeup. So if I were to miss Jum'ah, the Friday prayer, instead of that I would pray the Dhuhr prayer. But I can't do that with the funeral prayer, and I can't do that with the Eid prayer. The funeral prayer is a very short prayer. So if during the funeral prayer I break my wudu, there's no way that I'm going to get back in time to finish the funeral prayer, and there's no makeup for it. So in an instance like that, I can do tayammum instead of doing a full wudu, even though the taps are right in front of me, because it takes seconds to do tayammum, whereas it'll take me at least a few minutes to do wudu and get back. Regarding the Eid prayer, also there's no makeup. So the Eid prayer normally is done in a big area, in an open area, open sky, and it may be difficult to, if you break your wudu, to move through the ranks of lots of people and then get to a faucet to make wudu again. Even if it's close to you, if there's a fear that you're going to miss the prayer, if there's a fear if you can get there and make your wudu and come back, that's fine. But if there's a fear that you're going to miss your prayer, then you could do tayammum and resume from where you left off. There is another opinion, which is that if let's say you're very close to missing a particular prayer time in Jum'ah, like Fajr or something, you can do tayammum and pray and then repeat due to the sanctity of the prayer. So basically, your prayer would not be valid, it would not be a sound prayer, it would not be a valid prayer, but due to the observance and piety and the sanctity of the prayer time, you could quickly do tayammum. So for example, you know that Fajr prayer is going in say a minute. There's no way that you're going to be able to do the fard elements, the 4 fard elements of the prayer, and then to pray your prayer, even if it was only the fard elements of the prayer as well, right? So in that instance, you know that you've got literally 30 seconds for prayer to go. So in that instance, you could make tayammum and then pray. But the sounder opinion is that you'd have to repeat your prayer anyway, because you wouldn't have been able to pray with tayammum if it was a normal prayer, but you're only doing that as an observance, as a show of piety and observance for the sanctity of that prayer time. So a valid excuse to perform tayammum: being far from water, 1 mile radius if outside the city. Okay, so first of all, why outside the city? Because inside the city, you're bound to find water. Inside the city, you have markets, you have houses, you have public buildings, you have baths, you have mosques, churches. There's a plethora of places in a city where you can go and make wudu or ask for water. But outside of the city, it needs to be in a 1 mile radius. So 1 mile from everywhere. So if I can't find water in a mile radius of me, then I can make tayammum. Extreme cold that one fears, damage to health or damage to limb. So if it's very, very cold, we're talking sub-zero temperatures, very, very cold, and you fear that you're healthy, and if you decided to make wudu, you know that there's sub-zero temperatures and you don't have a towel or you don't have anything, you're in the open, you're not in the city, and that you're going to damage yourself, you're severely going to damage yourself. Now this must be based on a reasonable assumption. It's not like, oh, it's very, very cold, so I'm gonna if I make the wudu, I know I'm not going to survive or I'm going to get sick. No, it has to be a reasonable assumption. Has this happened to you before, where you've made wudu in cold water? Normal, when it's cold, a quick wudu will not really do much to you unless you are of very weak constitution from the beginning. And one of the conditions is actually that if you have no way of warming the water. So if I warm the water, even though it's cold, and I can warm the water, so I'm in the countryside, I'm camping, and there is water, but it's very cold water. It's 0 degrees outside. There's a hard frost on the floor. If I can warm the water up, then I have to use that water to make tayammum. If I can't warm the water up, and I know that there's a chance of frostbite, damage to a limb, or there's a real chance that I'm gonna get hypothermia or something, then you do not wash yourself for ablution. You make tayammum instead. Sickness, either cause sickness or worsen. So sickness, either you're sick from before, and by making wudu you shall increase your sickness, or there's a real chance that you shall get sick. So this wouldn't really work for a simple cold or a flu. It would be stuff that's more serious than this. If this would increase your cold and flu and take it to a next level, then obviously it would apply here also. But you're really looking for past experience. So have you made wudu in cold water before and it's made you very sick? Or are there clear signs? For example, I'm on the verge of a full-blown cold that's going to waylay me for a week in bed. I can feel my throat gripping up. I can feel heaviness in my chest, my sinuses. And I know that if I make tayammum now, I'm going to get really, really sick. And also asking the reliable opinion of a doctor. A Muslim doctor who knows about tayammum, not just a normal doctor who doesn't understand the difference between wudu and the importance of wudu and tayammum. Somebody who knows, a reliable doctor who knows some basic and who knows some understanding of the deen, whose opinion you can rely upon. So past experience, a clear sign, and a reliable opinion. Fear of animals or an enemy. If you're out camping and you're far from civilization, and there's a watering hole or a well and there's animals around it, or you know that 5 minutes ago there was a lion around there, or hyenas, or dangerous large cats, or wild dogs, or like really, really wild dogs, then you can make tayammum. Or if there's fear of an enemy, for example, there's a riot going on, or there's a disturbance, a civil disturbance somewhere, or your enemy knows that you're in this part, you're in this area, and you saw him waiting for you, and you know he's going to be waiting for you if you go to make wudu, and he's going to cause you extreme harm. In that situation, you make tayammum as well. Lack of apparatus such as bucket, rope, or ladder. So you've got a well, you found a well, but there's no way of you getting to the water because the apparatus has been broken. There's no ladder, there's no rope, there's no bucket. In that instance, you look around the area, what's reasonable, and if you find nothing or you have nothing on you, then you'd make tayammum as well. Need for water for yourself, companion, or mount in the present or in the future. So if you know you've got to travel from A to B and you have a certain amount of water, and you know that there's no chance of getting water ahead, you don't know if you're traveling to another city, you don't know where the next watering hole is, should we say. It doesn't really matter so much in today's day and age, especially if you're traveling from short cities to short cities, because travel is normally for a few hours and you know there's going to be multiple stops on the way. But if you're in another country that's not so developed, or you're literally traveling in the sticks, and you don't know the lay of the land, you don't know if there is a service station coming up, right? The previous signs indicated that there's nothing. and you've only got a limited supply of water, and you don't know if it's gonna make it to the next one. If you make wudu with that, and then you've run out or very little left, and there's a genuine danger that you're not going to find water ahead for yourself, your mount, or your companion, then you would make tayammum. Okay, wiping over wounds. If one has wounds on one's body, yet his undamaged limbs are more than his damaged limbs, he must wash the undamaged limbs and wipe the wounded ones, as long as wiping them does not hurt him. One may not, however, wash some limbs and perform tayammum as well. This will come again in the chapter on wiping over casts and bandages, but he's mentioned it here because you have to either wash or do tayammum. You can't mix both. So if you've got damage to most of your skin, most of your body, due to war, due to torture, due to a skin condition or an accident or something like that, you're mostly covered in damage. Say most of my body is damaged except for one arm. In this instance, I would do tayammum. I wouldn't wash. But if, for example, most of my body is fine and I've got, say, a big, that my arms are damaged, but most of my body is fine. So I would do ablution for most of my bodies, and I would wipe the areas that I cannot wash over, because washing might make it worse. So if most of the body is covered in wounds, one can do tayammum instead of wudu. And if most of the body is sound and some of the body wounded, then do wudu and wipe over the wounds. So we basically cannot mix tayammum and wudu. You either do tayammum or wudu, not both. Okay, searching for water. Seek water if near certainty that there is water outside of the city. So basically we mentioned inside the city, you're bound to find water somewhere. If you're outside of the city, you're traveling somewhere, then it's your duty to seek water. Before you decide to do tayammum, you have to seek. And there's signs that have been mentioned that you look for example, smoke, right? In the distance, if you see smoke, that's normally sign of a human, or a homestead or a village. Birds flying overhead. Birds normally hang around water, especially if you're in a desert or an oasis, a desert. Normally birds hang around water. Noises. If you hear noises, it's a sure sign that there's some humans around. You have to obviously keep yourself safe. So if it's safe to do so, if it's not safe to do so, then you wouldn't do this. But if it's safe to do so, so you wouldn't do this if you were in the jungle and you know there's wild animals around and you don't want to wander off alone, right? So if there's safety in numbers and you decide to go looking for water on your own, that's not advisable. You'd have to keep yourself safe first. And the scholars mentioned 400 steps, not the whole mile. So you wouldn't need to go the whole mile to look for water. It would only be 400 steps. So for example, you're here and in a radius around you of 400 steps in each 4 directions, check. And if you don't find water, then you can make tayammum. You could visually look as well. So get to like a small hill or a height, and then you could look. And obviously, if the horizon's clear, you'd go at least a few kilometers. You'd be able to see all around you. And if you're in the desert, even if the desert is flat, you'd see for miles around you, and then you'd know if there's water or not. So if you're inside the city, you must search for water. If you're outside the city, then searching for water, if reasonably sure water is within a mile, then it becomes obligatory for you to search your immediate area. If it's hopeful that it's within a mile, it's recommended to search. If you're hopeful, so you think, I think there's smoke in the distance over there. It looks like smoke. It's not a dark cloud. I'm sure there's possibly water. Then obviously it's recommended for you to search if you're hopeful. And if you're not sure, like you don't know where you are, you don't know the train, you don't know anything, then you don't have to search. Now, asking for water, if you're in a place or in a situation where you have to ask somebody for water, in the first instance, Islam preserves human dignity and human honor, right? So we don't need to humiliate ourselves by asking people for water. If you go to an area where the people are hostile, travelers don't normally pass through those towns because of those reasons, or you fear from their glances, the way everybody's looking at you, or whatever the case may be, that they're not going to be receptive to you if you ask them for water, or if they charge a very, very high price. So for example, water costs should we say 1 JD, and somebody's selling it for 5 JDs or 10 JDs. Now that's a ludicrously high price. Nobody would pay that price, and you don't have to pay that price either. So in that instance, you'd save your dignity, you'd save your honor, right? You don't need to humiliate yourself. You would make tayammum. But if you know, if they are receptive to you, then you have to ask, and you must ask. And most people are receptive. Most people, if you ask them for water, they would give you water. If they're not willing to give, and you know they're not going to be receptive, just by the way they are, then, or you fear something for yourself, then you don't need to ask. What if one forgets that he has water in his caravan and performs tayammum due to lack of water? So for example, you searched everywhere, you searched your entire encampment as well, and there was no water. Or you forgot that you had placed water underneath your pillow, and you made tayammum because there was no water, and then after your prayer you realized that there was no, that you found the water. In that instance, what would you do? When the scholars say that what's done is done now, your prayer's okay, you do not need to repeat your prayer, and Allah knows best. But obviously now that you found water, so now you have to make wudu for your next prayer. Okay, now tayammum requires an intention. Now wudu didn't require an intention, but tayammum requires an intention. Because water in itself is naturally pure and purifying, whereas the soil, nobody would say the soil is purifying by its nature, right? The soil normally makes you dirty. It leaves stains on your clothes, it leaves you dirty, and sometimes it's very difficult to get off. Where pure and purifying water is pure, and it dries, and it leaves no residue. So in that, because of that, we need to make the intention that we're going to make tayammum. Now, something must be observed here. You must intend one of 3 things in order to pray, right? So tayammum in itself is not as strong as normal wudu, right? Where you make a wudu even without intention, and you can do whatever is possible to do that requires a wudu, such as tawaf, reading the Quran, praying, things like that. Whereas with tayammum, if you decide to do tayammum because there's no water, because you want to read Quran, then that tayammum is not strong enough for you to pray in now. You have to make another tayammum with the intention of prayer. Unless you do one of 3 things. Unless you intend a general purification. So for example, I'm making tayammum for a general purification that will enable me to do everything. That needs to be firmly in your mind. Or you intend that you are going to make this tayammum to pray. Or intend any act of worship that cannot be done without purification. So in your mind, you're intending any act of worship that you know cannot be done without purification. These are the 3 conditions. So using earth, it has to be dust, soil, or mud. So you cannot use anything found on the earth that does not burn and turn to ashes, such as trees and grass, or melt and soften, such as metals and glass. Does that seem like a grammatically sound sentence? I'm not sure. Basically, you can't use anything that turns to ashes and burns. So for example, paper, wood, or perishable materials, even though they're all originally from the earth, but anything perishable you cannot make tayammum with. Likewise, metals like any metal, gold, silver, lead, these metals can melt also. Glass also melts. So you can't make tayammum with these. You can only make tayammum with dust, sands, stones, soil. Dust or the item being covered in dust is not a condition. Okay, so for example, if I decide to make wudu on a stone, so I've got this brick, right? I've got this brick lying around and it's inside the house for some reason, which means it's clean, there's going to be no dust on it. That's not the condition that it has to be dusty. If I can't find water and I now want to make tayammum using that brick or using that stone, I don't need to see a residue of dust on it. It's enough to place my hands on it, and I can use that to wipe my face with and my arms, and it's fine. Similarly, if there was a table here, right, and the table I'm on is glass. Now if this table was sitting here for a month, no doubt there would be a layer of dust on this. And if I had to make tayammum because there was no water, I could put my hands and use the dust on the table to make tayammum with, even though the table is of glass. But I could use the dust on its top surface. Now, the obligatory elements is, as we mentioned, intention. You have to intend. You have to strike the surface and you wipe your face completely, and then you wipe both arms. So it's 2 strikes. So one for the face, one for the arms. Exception to this is if struck by dust. So for example, there's a dust storm, and in the dust storm, if you kind of, if you're out and exposed in the dust storm and your arms are totally exposed and your face is exposed, then in that situation you would have made your tayammum. Or if somebody literally throws a bag of dust at you and you completely get covered, or somebody empties dust from the top and it falls down and it completely covers you, right? Then all the areas that, and then you make your intention, right? So it's important to make your intention in the dust storm as well. So when you're in the dust storm and it's dust all around you, your intention is that I'm gonna use this opportunity to make tayammum. So likewise with the dust falling on you, you'd also make a quick intention, and then as it falls on you and it covers your parts, then it would be okay. So you must wipe the entire face, entire arms, including the elbows. So just like wudu, you can't have rings, you can't have anything in the way, bands, watches, and must wipe with most of the hand, at least 3 fingers. So how is tayammum done? You basically put your hand in the ground, on the soil, right? And if you did that, made the intention, did that, raised your hands and wash your face completely the same way as you would do in wudu once, strike your hands again the second time, and then wash your arms completely, and that's it, you're done. The sunnah, which we're going to look at next, it's a little bit different. 2 strikes, intention, and 2 strikes, and wiping, and that's it. That's how easy tayammum is. So the sunnah elements, you start in the name of Allah, Bismillah, and then you perform tayammum in one go. So you have the intention, you said Bismillah, and you don't strike the hands, wash your face, and then look around and speak to someone for a second, for a minute, and then strike, and then wipe your arms. No, it's done continuously. So you strike, face, strike, arms. You move your hands backwards and forwards. So the sunnah actually is to put your hands in the soil and to move them a little bit, right? You move the hands a little bit, and then you shake off the excess dust. Okay, so you move the hands a little, you spread your fingers, you put your fingers in the soil, you move your hands a little bit, and then you shake off the excess, and then you wipe your face completely, as you would in a normal ablution. So how is tayammum invalidated? Anything that breaks a normal ablution will break your tayammum as well. So going to the toilet, sleeping, sexual intercourse, passing gas would break your tayammum. And you don't need to renew it at each prayer time. So you can have tayammum and that could last you 2 prayer times or 3 prayer times. The exception is if you find water. You say, I've made tayammum to pray dhuhr, and half an hour after dhuhr I found water. I don't need to repeat my tayammum, but I then need to make wudu for my next prayer. If I've got wounds on my body and they're healing and they've healed. So for example, I had a wound here and my healing is so good that after 3 hours it's healed now, right? I would then make wudu for the next prayer. I wouldn't wipe no more, because the reason that caused the wiping no longer exists, right? The wounds are gone now. The wounds on my body are it's safe to use water over them. Or the sickness is over. So what caused sickness is over, right? I no longer feel sick enough that I need to do tayammum. I can now go and do wudu. So that's it. That's it for today. And inshallah, next lesson we shall look at wiping over the casts. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.